In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello, everyone. This is our Orthodox Survival Course, Class 56. Today is the 23rd of June in the old calendar. That's the 6th of July in the new calendar. Anno Domini 2020. It is the eve of the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, St. John the Forerunner. I entitled today's class, Memory and Eternity. Memory and Eternity. We're going to take a break from the history of the Bolshevik Revolution and our reflections on the current chaos of our time, or at least our direct reflections. We're going to have some indirect reflections today on the chaos of our own present situation, because I think we need to talk about some good things, not just bad things. First of all, before I get started, I want to thank everyone again, all of our donors, people who've helped me financially, and of course all of you have helped us with your prayers. May the Lord reward your love with His grace. And if anyone wants to help and consider a gift to help me out, if you have PayPal, you can send a gift to my account at frstevenallen@gmail.com. Or if you want to receive a receipt for your donation, contact me at that email address, and I can tell you how to donate to our parish. And the parish will in turn pass the donation on to me and send you a receipt. So today I want to take a break, talking about the Bolshevik Revolution, and then talking about the Marxist revolution that's going on right now in our country and in the world in general, is a very grave topic and often very difficult. And it can get us down if we just talk about bad things. So I want to talk about some good things today, and I want to talk about an important weapon or an important tool for warding off gloominess and for keeping our balance and keeping our strength in the present situation. We've been talking about sad things for so long, we need a break. We cannot speak only of what is evil, but must also, and more importantly, more primarily, speak of what is good, because only good can preserve us from the evil. Today I want to talk about two related things, memory and later on, eternity. Memory is one of the essential weapons for fighting off our would-be jailers, the people constructing the new normal all around us right now. Right? So memory is one of the essential weapons for fighting off our would-be jailers, the ones who want to create the prison planet that Alex Jones talks about, and is a real thing that could happen to us, right? Memory is one of the essential weapons for fighting off our would-be jailers and staying free from the mental prison of this new normal they are working so hard to create in our minds. We're prisoners of our own minds, right? And we don't want to be prisoners of our own minds. We want to be free. Memory ultimately is the gateway to eternity, as I'll explain later. So let me say all this again. Memory is one of the essential weapons for fighting off our would-be jailers and staying free from the mental prison of this new normal they are working so hard to create in our minds. And memory ultimately is the gateway to eternity, something I'll explain later. So I'm going to start this process of encouraging you to use this weapon of memory. I'm going to start this process by doing it myself, and I'm going to share some memories of my own. Now, these are not just things that happened in my own life, but they're also memories passed on to me by others. Now, I'm not doing this because I want to be the center of your attention or because my life's more important than anybody else's, but because it's the only life that I have. And so I'm going to share my memories and then encourage you to develop and share your memories. Here's a memory of a family familiar to me. These are people who lived in rural Louisiana in the 20s and 30s. It was very hot there. It's still very hot there, but then they didn't have air conditioning. As a matter of fact, they didn't even have screens. They had to sleep at night with mosquito nets to avoid getting bitten and getting malaria. And they slept on mattresses stuffed with Spanish moss, that gray, bearded stuff that hangs from the trees in the south. They worked hard. They were sharecroppers. What's a sharecropper? A sharecropper is someone who doesn't own his own land. He lives on the land of a wealthier man, a landowner, and in exchange for using his land as his rent, he gives him a percentage of his crop. I believe a standard was 1/3 of his crops. So they had to work very hard, and they had to give the landowner a big share of the produce of their labors. They'd get up at before dawn to illustrate the life of these people. Let me just give a picture of a day in the life of the mother of the family. She'd have to get up before dawn, and she'd very industrious lady, the one I'm talking about. She'd get up before dawn and clean her house, and she'd have to light a fire in a wood stove. They didn't have modern utilities. They didn't have running water or a gas stove. They didn't have indoor plumbing. So she had to light her wood stove and bake bread and make breakfast for the family. She'd get up and clean her house and make breakfast for the family and say her prayers before the workday even started. And then she'd go out with her husband and her sons and work in the fields. They tell me she could pick 60 pounds of cotton a day. Now, picking cotton by hand is serious business. The cotton bolls have little pricklies inside of them, little thorns, and so you pick cotton all day, you bleed. Your fingertips get all bloody, and finally you develop calluses. Well, that's hard work, but this lady could do this. They didn't own a car. They didn't have a car. They had horses, draft animals. And they lived outside of town, so on weekends, on Saturdays, the father of the family would take the wife and children to town so they could stay overnight with an aunt and go to church the next day. They had to save up to get their own land. Finally, by the year 1950, they'd saved up and gotten their own land. But sadly, their sons didn't want it. They didn't want to be farmers like their parents. And so they sold their farm finally when they were too old to keep doing this, especially by themselves, because all the sons had moved away and embraced the modern life that happened to our state after World War II, for good or for ill. So they didn't have anybody to take the land, and they didn't have anyone to work with them anymore, so they sold their farm in old age and moved to town, and that's when I met them. These were not oppressed minority people, although their white Anglo-Saxon neighbors did make fun of the way they spoke English. These people were my grandparents. Their names were Narcisse and Rowena Roy Lacombe. So I knew them when they were older, and I remember going to their house in their little country town. It's called Cottonport, Louisiana, a place called Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana. Avoyelles Parish. In Louisiana, we call our counties parishes. And holdover from our pre-American days, we were subjects of the French or Spanish crown. And so they lived in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana, and I remember going to their home. This memory is from I'm about 4 years old, I suppose, about the year 1960, 1961, 62. And I remember getting up, and their house was so clean, it smelled clean. You know how somebody's houses are so clean, and this is not modern clean with, chemical clean, but this is just clean, a natural clean. It smells so clean. And getting up early in the morning and in my grandparents' home in the country and coming out and seeing my grandfather sitting by the window looking at his garden, saying the rosary. And this memory stuck indelibly in my mind. And it was a moment in which I met eternity. There was something about this house and something about the sight of my grandfather that said, there is another world. That this world is a window to another world. I knew that he'd already been up early in the morning. But when I was still asleep, he had already gotten up. He'd already gone to Mass. Of course, they were Catholics. They were French Catholics. And they bought a little house down the street from the church. I don't know why, but I bet it was because they wanted to be within walking distance of the church since they never owned or drove a car. And I knew he'd already been up and been to his daily Mass. He'd already gotten up, and I could smell the coffee being made in the kitchen. And he was saying his rosary by the window, looking at his garden, a beautiful vegetable garden he lovingly tended. And so this was a childhood memory that connected me to my own past, but also because of the piety of my grandparents and the frankly otherworldly atmosphere of the house. It was a window to eternity. So here my memory meets eternity. Here's another memory. This is on the other side of my family, my father's side. They're Anglo-Saxon or British, probably mixed British origin, Anglo-Saxon or Scottish or Irish, whatever we were. The Allens, and my grandmother Allen's maiden name was Butler. She was a butler from Shreveport. My grandfather Allen was a Yankee from Michigan, although we grew up, he lived in the South almost all of his adult life, and we grew up in the South. And I had a childless uncle and aunt. My Aunt Harriet was my father's sister. And my father's family were not Roman Catholics. They were Methodists. And my aunt taught in the Methodist Sunday school at Rain Memorial Methodist Church on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. And this is a very beautiful church. And it was built after the war. Well, in the South, when we say the war, you know what war I'm talking about. It was built after the war by a family in memory of their son. And when you go, I don't know if BLM or somebody's torn this plaque down yet, but at least last time I looked, when you approach this church, and it's on St. Charles Avenue, this beautiful oak-lined avenue in New Orleans, where the streetcars run up and down, and there are all these magnificent homes many from the Victorian era are built in imitation of that era's style. And it's a beautiful old brick church with a famous tall spire with a lighted window in the spire. And when you go into the church, you look over the door, and there's a plaque saying, I believe, if my memory serves me well, it says, "To the God who has preserved me all my life, and in memory of my son, who died at Chancellorsville." Now, Chancellorsville, for those who don't know your American war between the states history, Chancellorsville was a great battle in 1863. It was considered Lee and Jackson's most brilliant triumph over the Union Army. But their son was killed. Like Stonewall Jackson, their son was killed in that battle. And they built this church in his memory. Well, my Aunt Harriet, my uncle and aunt, and her husband, Uncle Lionel, they were childless, much to their lifelong sadness. But they took us 6 nephews and nieces, and they did a lot with us. They took us to museums and battlefields, and really gave us a cultural education. And when we were little, even though we were little Catholics, my aunt insisted on very ecumenically taking us to the Methodist Sunday school. At least I went. I don't know. I think my brothers and sisters went. But I remember I have these distinct memories, and there's a distinct difference between the otherworldly feel of my French Catholics' grandparents' austere and yet warm and pious Catholic home, and the utter contentment and worldly happiness of going to the Methodist Sunday school on Sunday mornings. So we'd get up. We were in uptown New Orleans on a beautiful street. It's called Marengo Street off St. Charles Avenue. And get up in the morning, and my aunt would take me by the hand. Although when I was a little older, she wouldn't take my hand. She said, "You're the gentleman and I'm the lady, and you're going to walk next to me. And you always stand closer to the street than me, because the gentleman always stands between the lady and the curb to protect her from getting mud thrown up by passing traffic." And so forth. So she also taught me lessons in gentlemanliness, even when I was a little fellow. But I remember the utter contentment and peace and stability of uptown New Orleans, uptown is the old Anglo-Saxon Protestant part of New Orleans. The utter stability, contentment, and innocence of the English character. The simple English character, not the distorted, corrupted, Masonic, upper-class English character. Remember St. Gregory, Pope of Rome, when he first saw the English in the slave market in Rome, said, call them not Angli, that is, Angles or English, call them Angeli, angels. And this is the good side, I think, indicative of the divine vocation of the English race, that on their good side is that they're basically content and innocent people. And this is very manifest in this world, the Anglo-Saxon part, the English part of the world of my childhood. So we'd get up and we'd walk down Marengo Street and turn right on, I think it was Peria Street, and walk past beautiful homes with beautiful lawns and the boxwood hedges, azalea bushes, and all the beautiful sights and smells of old New Orleans in the spring or in a bright sunny fall afternoon, and go into the sweet and gentle world of Wesleyanism in my aunt's Methodist Sunday school. And you felt so warm and enveloped in happiness, you see. And this is that world that I lived in as a child. This, both the Catholic world and the Protestant world of my family. So these are some memories, and it's good to have memories like this, because this gives you stability, right? It gives you roots. You realize that you come from somewhere and you're going somewhere. You're not just a leaf floating on the river of time. You're not just an atom circling around in the midst of a chaos. You're someone. Now I'm going to tell you another story, or a couple of stories about a character in my family. This is, remember, my grandmother, Allen, was a butler from Caddo Parish, Louisiana. Caddo Parish is the home of, the location of Shreveport, Louisiana, in the northwest corner of the state. And her brother, my great-uncle, Willis Butler, who died in great old age, over 100 years old, from 1912 to 1960, was elected to 12 consecutive terms as the coroner of Caddo Parish, Louisiana. And he wrote a book about it called Somebody Called the Coroner, and it's full of funny stories. And one funny story is from the very beginning of his career as a young, idealistic physician and coroner, and he was called to a murder scene. And I guess in those days, coroners went off on their own to murder scenes, or at least went off themselves to murder scenes with the deputy sheriffs or the policemen. Well, this time he didn't wait for the police, and he was being called to a little nightclub out of town. A nightclub, loosely speaking, it was a house converted into a dance hall, and the patrons were these black people, or as we said in those days, Negroes. Negro is not a term of insult. You watch old videos of Martin Luther King Jr. giving speeches, and he uses the word Negro. It's just what we all used, and it's a nice word. I think it's a warm and rich word, unlike black, which is just so, hard and aggressive, So there are these, and I'm going to use this word, and it's not a racist term, it's just the way everybody talked then. White and colored folks all use the word. So it was some poor Negroes, and they had this nightclub, and he was called out because somebody heard there was a murder. Of course, there are murders going on all the time in that particular community, which we all know. So he went out there, and they were dancing and having a good time, but in the middle of the floor there was this corpse, and there was a pool of blood around it. And my uncle came in, my great-uncle came in, he said, "Okay, y'all, what happened here?" And they said, "Oh, Dr. Butler, we don't know. We don't know, there's just dead body, And he said, "Well, somebody did this." So we had to walk around the room, and there was a cot or a bed in a corner of the room, and he bent down, and he looked under that bed, and there was a man under that bed holding a knife, just looking at my uncle, holding that knife, and he was shaking like a leaf. Obviously he was the one who'd done it, So my uncle said, "Well, you got to come out of there. You got to give me that knife." And so the man came out, and he handed Uncle Willis a knife, and he seemed very penitent. And my uncle said, "Okay, you got to come along with me. We got to go to town." and you have to go to the jail. So he took him out, and I guess it was 1912, 1913, World War I era. So I suppose the car he had was a Ford Model T, which is what everybody had then. And he didn't have any handcuffs or anything. He wasn't even a policeman. He was a doctor. And he took his big pocket handkerchief and tied the fella's forearm to the window frame of his car and took him into town. But at the end of this account, my uncle did note wryly, "I never did that again." That is, I never went out without a policeman. So obviously this is a different world, right? And the self-righteous, politically correct, anti-racist crowd can sniff and say, well, that's all very paternalistic and racist. And how dare you speak with such equanimity of such an evil society? And I can just tell you, I don't care what you think. And it was a beautiful world, and I'm very proud of my family. And it's a very funny story. Now I want to talk about a totally different story about a different person from a different part of the world. When I was in my early 20s, for a year or so, I was a novice in a Benedictine monastery in Louisiana, St. Joseph Abbey, in St. Benedict, Louisiana, near Covington, Louisiana. The monastery had been founded by German, Austrian, and Swiss German Benedictines in the late 19th century, and well into the 20th century, we still had, in the time I was there, in the 70s and early 80s, we still had, because I was also a student there in their seminary in the 70s, then I was a novice briefly in the early 80s. We still had German monks, German, Austrian, Swiss German, elderly monastics. And there was one particular whom I remember very well. His name was Father Luke Joerg, Joerg, or J-O umlaut, how do you say that? I don't speak German. R-G, Jurg. And I remember him well because it was the year I was in the monastery, it was the year he died. And I took him his meals every day. And Father Luke was an interesting character. He had been a monk for many years in Dormition Abbey in Jerusalem. Now, those of you who have been to Jerusalem and you've visited the site of Our Lady's Dormition, it's on Mount Sion. And, the Orthodox have the site of her tomb in the Garden of Gethsemane, but the Catholics have the site of her dormition, the site of the house where she reposed, the house of St. John the Theologian where she reposed on Mount Sion, and over that they built in the late 19th century, with money actually from Kaiser William II, they built a magnificent abbey church. And you can go down to the crypt, and there's the very site of Our Lady's Dormition, which you can venerate. Well, he'd been a monk there for years, and after this state of Israel was created in 1948, and the Israeli government rounded up, out of hatred and revenge and all that stuff, they rounded up all the German and Austrian nationals and put them in concentration camps. Father Luke escaped twice from Israeli concentration camps. The second time, he got away for good, and he came to North America. Well, he ended up in St. Joseph Abbey. And a remarkable thing about him is that the very day they switched to the new Mass and the new office back in the 60s, he didn't come to church. He never went to church again. And he read the office, and he said the old Mass in his cell in the monastery. So we never saw him in church. But we saw him on the grounds, saying his rosary and working in the yard. He worked hard till he couldn't work anymore. He'd work every day outside with his long leather apron on over his habit. Never saw him without his habit. And sang his rosary while raking leaves, and so forth. But Father Luke's, I bring up Father Luke because the story of his vocation to the monastic life is very telling about a different psychology in a different world. When he was a child, he was born in the 1890s, and he was born as a subject of the Emperor Franz Joseph, an Austrian, all right, under the Habsburgs. So I knew someone who was born and lived under the Habsburgs, and I knew someone who remembered the Russian royal family too. I'll get to that in a minute. And so Father Luke tells the story. This is how he told the story of his monastic vocation. And he had a high voice, at least when I knew him. In his old age, he had a high voice, and he still had his German accent. He said, when I was a little boy, he said, we would get up at 4 in the morning, and we would go to church, and we would say our prayers, and we'd work and work and work and work. He lived on a farm, right? We'd work and work, and if I was bad, my father would beat me. So one morning, I was 12 years old, and I woke up in the morning, and I heard my father talking to some men downstairs. And I came downstairs, and my father was talking to two priests. And my father said, "Fritz," he said, "Fritz, these two fathers are Benedictine monks from Jerusalem. And they want you to go with them to Jerusalem and to be a monk." And I said, well, I asked them, "What do you do?" And they said, "We get up at 4 in the morning, and we go to church, and we say our prayers, and we work, and we work, and we work." And I said, "Will you beat me?" And they said, "No." And I said, "I'm going to be a monk." So he went with them, and he lived in Jerusalem the rest of his life until the Israelis decided to persecute the Gentiles there in the state of Israel in 1948. So what are some things about this story that are so telling? One, of course, is the closeness of the old agrarian life to monastic life, right? They lived pretty much the same way, except the monks, it was more intense, more prayers, more church, but still essentially, very much the same life, whether you were a layperson or a monk. And the other thing is the totally unromantic and unsentimental aspect of the vocation, or not even a very spiritual vocation. Here's a boy who has a new life opening in front of him. He's already very religious. He already has deeply instilled in him the concept of duty. So he didn't, I'm sure at various points in his adult life, he said, "What am I doing here?" I decided to come here because I want to get away from my father beating me. But he believed that God had called him, right? Even in this very unromantic way, or unsentimental, unspiritual way. This is his vocation, and he lived someone according to duty in his station of life, as well as he could, according to conscience. Without all this, obviously without a lot of psychological self-analysis or introspection, as is so common today. We're all so wrapped up in ourselves, and obviously he was someone who was not wrapped up in himself. He's looking outward, right, towards God, towards other people, towards his duty. So it's a wonderful story. I love it. It's one of my all-time favorite memories from that time in my life, knowing this man and knowing his story. Now I'm going to tell something from the Orthodox world, a childhood memory of the bishop who tonsured me, a reader and subdeacon. His name was Archbishop Anthony of Los Angeles. And he was a child. He was a child before the revolution. And his father was Blagochenny, or a dean in the Ukraine in those days. And so he would travel to churches to inspect what was going on in the parish churches. And he went to a lot of, and so he took along his son. So Archbishop Anthony remembered these things from his childhood. And he remembered his father taking him to a great monastery that's about to be visited by the royal family. I don't remember which monastery, if it was the Pochaev Lavra or one of these great Cenobitic monasteries that existed before the revolution. And Vladika remembered that the monastery had 45 hieromonks, so there must have been hundreds of monks. It was one of the larger monasteries. There were 45, besides the Archimandrite, there were over 40 hieromonks. And they were all vested in their priestly vestments and lined up. And you can imagine the scene of the great monastery, the bells ringing, the banners, the abbot bringing out the bread and salt to greet the emperor and his family. And then the royal family comes up. They must have been in their motor cars, right, coming up wearing the ladies wearing their plumed hats, and the men resplendent in their uniforms, all in wonderful, Victorian or Edwardian finery of the European upper classes of that day. And they came up, and of course everyone expected that the Tsar and Tsaritsa and the royal children would go to the abbot to get a blessing and then proceed in to the monastery to venerate the holy things in the church and so forth. But no, the Tsar, followed by his family, went up to every one of those priests, 45 priests, and bowed and got a blessing from every one of those 45 priests. Now think of that. Contrast that kind of person. Contrast that kind of ruler with the people who rule us today. Think about it. What we've lost. But we have the memory, you see. And so if you have the memory, you haven't really completely lost it. So I want to encourage you to remember that you have memory and to cultivate your memory, both your memory of things that happened outside of yourself, that is, not just your own life, but by reading books, by listening to chants and music and songs, by looking at art, to store up, make your soul a storehouse of memory, make your soul a living, I hate to say museum because that sounds kind of dead, but a living storehouse, a whole cosmos within your soul of memory, both of sacred things and also of secular things that contribute to your spiritual life and to your inner life, to your development as a person. One thing you can do, and it's a great thing to do, is to write your autobiography. Write your autobiography. So I offer these snippets from my life, not because my life is so important or more interesting than other people's, although certainly I've had an interesting life and I'm very grateful for it, but because it's what I know. You know, everyone can only write his own autobiography, right? And every writer, really, every great writer ends up writing about what he knows best. You know, every great fictional world, say Faulkner's rural Mississippi, right, is a mythopoeic transformation of real things, of his own memory, right? So every writer writes best about what he knows. And that includes you and me. So my purpose is to show you how your memory, or your memory of other people's memories, your version of the story they passed on to you, is a door to the world of meaning, the meaning that's inside of you. And it's so critical right now, this moment today, right, when they're destroying our monuments and they're burning the books, whether literally or figuratively, right, to sit down and go over your whole life and write it down, if you've never done that. And along this tale that we're going to tell, while we're writing it, to relate how God was working in our life, how God was part of this great story. He's really the primary author of this great story. And to put our story into the great story, with a capital G, the great story of how God made us and God saved us. And He's coming again to bring us to His heavenly kingdom. Your life is part of that story. And before you write, ask the Lord to enlighten you, to remember everything that's happened, and also, most importantly, to see it all in the light of His providence over you, to see everything in your life, the good and the bad, in light of His providence over you. Your own history under His providence is a microcosm of the history of all men under that same providence. Okay? He has done and He will do everything for our salvation. Always remember that and always be grateful. Okay? Always remember and always be grateful. Remembrance and gratitude are the way out of sadness. They're a great strength in times of trouble. Remembrance and gratitude are the way out of sadness and a great strength in times of trouble. Writing about the sad things and the bad things, you've got to do that. It's cathartic. That is, it cleanses us, right? It purges us. Right? Writing about the good things is uplifting. The beautiful and the ugly things, the good and the bad things, the false paths we trod and the delusions we finally shucked, and the truth we finally painfully obtained by the power of God's merciful love for us. It's all there, and ultimately it's all good. Just try it. You'll see. Sit down and just start writing. And when you write an autobiography, it doesn't have to start like David Copperfield, I was born. It may not be easy for you to remember what happened in early childhood. Just start writing down. Don't do it in a single bound volume, but because I'm still, I guess I'm a dinosaur. I guess most of y'all are going to do this on a word processor. When I did it on paper. When I started doing it as a young man, I did it on paper. But but you don't have to. I was about to say use loose leaf sheets in a binder, but I guess if you're using your word processor, you don't have to do it in order. Just start different pages, I guess, or different document files with different incidents in your life, different memories. It could be very fragmentary memories. It could be long extended stories. Just put all those episodes, just write them as they come to you, and then you'll find that you're going to add on to them. Then you're going to start interpreting them and see the meaning in them. And then one day you can weave it all together in one continuous narrative if you want. But the important thing is to bring all this to mind and then to place it all under God's providence and to ask the Lord to anchor you in the knowledge that He's over your life and to see His hand working through all these incidents in your life. And also to see this, finally you're going to start seeing how everything in your life is also symbolic. There's a popular Orthodox fellow on the internet now. He has a little show called the Symbolic Universe. He's I sort of call him the Orthodox Jordan Peterson, right? He's trying to train people to see the mythopoeic or symbolic meaning in ordinary stuff, or things that happen, or things in literature and history and art and so forth. But you're going to start seeing this in your own life. How certainly in my own life, just that story I told you about my grandfather's garden, right? It's a window to another world, a window to the Garden of Eden, right? Or the beauty of uptown New Orleans on a spring morning or a fall morning, right? It's a window to another world. It not only symbolizes in an abstract way or in a empty way or a purely notional way, but actually is an actual doorway of the psyche into that world that's more real than this world, right? So you're going to start seeing this in your own life too. God will guide you if you just ask Him. Another thing besides this autobiography project, I want to encourage everybody to store up the right books. Store up the right books. So memory, we're talking about memory. Now memory writ large is what we call history, or rather history. What we call history is simply memory writ large, right? It's our corporate memory, the shared memory above all of the church, right? But of a nation, of a people, of a civilization, of a family. Okay? The funny thing is that right now, as these Vandals, and frankly, a footnote, Vandal is too nice a word for them. The Vandals were an ancient barbarian tribe who were really bad, but all the ancient barbarians were much more noble people than the people you have now destroying things. So I say Vandal is a nice word to call them. They don't deserve such a nice word. The funny thing is that all these Vandals are destroying the monuments, and the schools are refusing to tell the truth. But the old books are still there, and they're actually more available than ever. They've been taken out of the libraries, but they're all online. I say, and actually you can still buy a lot of them, buy hard copies, a lot of them, reproductions or even original hard copies and so forth. So the bad guys, why are the bad guys still leaving? The bad guys are not only leaving it available, they're making it available. I believe in an earlier talk I talked about how Google Books has all these amazing books, totally politically incorrect books, sorted up by Google. And why do they don't need to destroy them. They think they don't need to destroy them. They believe they've won already. They don't need to destroy these books because they've made everybody so stupid that they don't want to read them or they don't know how to read them, right? They just want to watch videos or whatever. So, but let's not prove them right. Let's prove them wrong. Let's prove them wrong and do some reading. Let me give you some examples of books you ought to have, and you can get. First example, the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedia Britannica was once a great resource. Of course, now it's all politically correct and mutilated and so forth, but it was once really great. So let's go back and remember, all hell broke loose in 1914, right? That was the end of really that Christian era of history. We're living after the end of the world, the end of our world. Okay, This 1911 Britannica is a concise written record of how Western man viewed himself at the height of his achievement, right? Remember the proud tower, the very height of that whole project of Western civilization before the partially engineered but partially just collaborated in mass suicide of Western man in the 20th century. So, of course, any encyclopedia is just a summary. It's if you think it's the whole picture, then you've got a distorted picture, right? But it's a tremendous entry into the collected learning of Western man before World War I. A concise written record of how Western man viewed himself at the height of his achievement. Of course, we have to filter all this through our Orthodox viewpoint. And so one weakness we have is, like most of my fellow Anglophones, I'm a monolingual, dummy. So I don't read Russian. I speak a little Russian, speak a little Greek, read a little Russian, read a little Greek, but I don't read enough Russian, Greek, or Romanian, Serbian, and so forth to read sources by Orthodox authors in the original languages. We need more and more of that. But we have all these other resources in our own language that we can then reinterpret the data through our Orthodox lens. So much of the data is there. It's in English language sources. And this 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, it's considered like, this 1911 edition is like an epitome or a paradigm of the encyclopedist's art. That's a very famous edition. So much of the data is there, and it's unimpaired by Marxist deconstruction. It's just there, right? There's a lot of totally non-PC stuff there. Of course, it's 1911. It's tainted by Darwinism and all the stuff that happened in the 19th century. It's still, so much of it's so good. And you can still buy it. You can buy the books. They're out there. And you can also read it online. I've got a link here. And you can download it at archive.org. I've got the link here in when I say here, I mean on my blog, I'll have these notes, right? And so archive.org, details, Encyclopedia Britannica, 1911, complete. But you need this application called DJVU, I guess that's Deja Vu, right? DJVU application to read it, but you can download that application. So get Encyclopedia Britannica 1911, just start reading it, and it has wonderful articles. For example, there's the article on the history of the English language. And the article on the history of the English language is by Sir James Murray, who's the primary architect of the Oxford English Dictionary. And fantastic. I mean, you just read it. History of the English Language by James Murray. I mean, wow. You'll have something, you'll have a treasure there. You'll have a memory. It's a memory of your language, right? Or at least for many of my listeners, perhaps your second language, but a very important second language. Right? It's my first language, and although it is the second language of my mother. But the English language is so important, and so whether we like it or not, right? So here, that's an example. Read the article by James Murray, History of the English Language, Encyclopedia Britannica, 1911. There, boom, you've got a huge memory. You've got something that is an anchor in reality. That's about something very important in your life. Okay, that's an example. Okay. There's another series called The Library of Universal History by Moses Coit Tyler and Israel Smith Clare. Now, this is published in the 1890s. It's another massive, all-encompassing record of how Western man, in particular Anglo-American man, okay, the people, they're at the top of their game, right, the 1890s, how he viewed himself before the cataclysm of the 20th century. Now, I don't entirely agree with these men. These men were Harvard intellectuals, right? They're Yankees. And so they're not entirely on the side that I would choose, right, in that dispute in the 19th century. But compared to people today, they and their southern antagonists, compared to people today, are virtually indistinguishable, right? So, but again, so there's a wonderful history, totally non-PC, and of man from the beginning of time and up to the 1890s. Right, so of course it has the flaws of a universal history, right? It can't tell the whole story, but it's an introduction. It's a way to get you started. It's a way to take a person who doesn't know anything, which is most of us, or 90% of us, right, and give us a start on getting a grasp on world history. So, but again, you have to fill it through your Orthodox lens. These are Anglo-Saxon. They are unabashed Anglo-Saxonists. Even in the introduction to the book, Tyler says that the great contest of today is, or the great question of today is whether the Anglo-Saxon race or the Russians are going to dominate the world. Okay, that's how they saw everything. It was the great game to dominate the world between the British Empire and the Russian Empire. It's very fascinating to read a history written by men who saw the world this way, right? So again, you have to filter it through your Orthodox lens. You can go back and review our survival course talks. You can read Father Seraphim's survival course lectures to put this data within that Orthodox framework. But it's a great resource. Now, this Library of Universal History, I can't find the whole thing online. The New York City Public Library has one of the volumes online. I think it's a volume about American history. But you can still buy reproductions of these volumes individually. And you can buy them in hard copy. I think they're around $30 a piece. So it'd be a little probably every month you could buy a volume. And or every other month, whatever your budget allows. Or if you can write a check, go ahead and get it. But it's wonderful to have this as a resource, right? Then our friend Vladimir Moss has written a world history from an Orthodox point of view. Of course, it's his Orthodox point of view. It is an Orthodox point of view. It's not the infallible word from on high. It's not the decree of an ecumenical council, but it's a serious attempt at a serious Orthodox scholar to write a world history from an Orthodox point of view. And so I've got the link to Volume 1 in our notes. You can follow that and get all the other. It's going to be a 12-volume work, and he's finished the first 6. So it's called An Essay in Universal History. An Essay in Universal History by Vladimir Moss. Go online, and I've got the link here in my notes. And by the way, do you have church history books? Make sure you have Eusebius of Caesarea's History of the Early Church. You can get it online. You can get it on, probably get a Pelican paperback for 50 cents somewhere. It's Eusebius' History of the Early Church through the reign of St. Constantine. And also, how many collections of the lives of the saints do you have? Make sure you're getting your collections of the lives of the saints. Very important. Because the saints, the biography in general, just in secular history, right? The biography of a great man tells you so much about history that any number of volumes of economic analysis and tales of battles and so forth couldn't tell you. The lives of great men are actually how people used to learn history. Or, for example, Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. That's kind of the secular, classical parallel to the lives of the saints. So get us many collections of the lives of saints, and now there's so much Orthodox literature in English now. It's unbelievable. From the time we became Orthodox in the early 80s till now, the explosion, the amazing explosion of Orthodox literature in English is just wonderful. So that's one of those things we have to be grateful for, and those happy things that we should think about. How much Orthodox literature is available in English that was never available before. And one thing that's available is the lives of the saints. Of course, I want to promote the collection from our own friends. Father Thomas Moretta has translated St. Dimitri of Rostov's great collection of the lives of the saints, available, used to be from Chrysostom Press, now from St. Herman Press. There's also Simeonopetra Monasteries on a Synaxarion. But get your lives of saints. And Buena Vista, Holy Apostles Convent, and Dormition Skeet in Buena Vista, Colorado, published very, very content-rich volumes of the lives of the saints. Also, do you have the Eerdman series? What's the Eerdman series? Okay, Eerdman, a good Dutch name, Eerdmans. It's a publishing house right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they've published the classic series edited by Schaff in the 19th century, from Anglican scholars of the collections called the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and then 2 series of the Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers. I think of them as the red series, the blue series, and the green series, and the blue series, because on the spine there's, for the Ante-Nicene Fathers, Ante-Nicene Fathers, there's a red tab on the spine, and for series 1 of the Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers, there's a green tab on the spine, and for the Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers Series 2, there's a blue tab on the spine. But everybody should have this. It's an inexpensive for beautiful hardcover books, you can find it very inexpensively. And also, these volumes to a great extent are available on the website newadvent.org. It's a Catholic website, newadvent.org. Also, look for the Catholic University of America's Fathers of the Church series and Ancient Christian Writers series. And then there's Memoria Press. One of my favorite homeschooling resources, or just schooling resources, Memoria Press. And believe me, the materials they do for children, we adults need them because we didn't learn these things. Okay, so don't be embarrassed to go back and read things done for children if they contain things you never were exposed to. So go to their website, memoriapress.com. Go to their website and find all their history and literature stuff. Just go; it's a candy store. Just go in there and you just get all of it. And their Famous Men of Greece and Famous Men of Rome series are classics. Right? Famous Men of Greece, Famous Men of Rome. Do that with your children, but you're going to benefit from it yourself. They also, besides Famous Men of Greece and Famous Men of Rome, they also have classic volumes of history, both Western civilization and American history, by old-fashioned authors who are telling the truth and aren't being their work isn't being cut up and misinterpreted and deconstructed by malignant Marxist revolutionaries. There's this lady named Susan Wise Bauer, Bauer, Susan Wise Bauer. She has a history series for children. When we were homeschooling our children in the 90s, we didn't have any good history curriculum. But now Susan Wise Bauer, she's sort of a giant now in the homeschooling world. She wrote her own history series. It's not perfect. There's a little bit at the very beginning. There's a little bit of the evolutionary kind of framework, but you can ignore that stuff. And most of it's really good. It's a wonderful introduction to history, and a lot of it is things that, frankly, we adults don't know. Okay, so get started through Susan Wise. You can read through Susan Wise Bauer, then go back and read Tyler and Claire, and then read Vladimir Moss, and listen to read Father Seraphim's transcripts, and go back listen to my talks, and you'll know more history than just about anybody you'll meet. Okay, so here's a plea. I want to make a plea. I need recommendations for church and world histories from the Orthodox authors that have been translated into English. So I've just mentioned Moss, but we need Orthodox authors who wrote in Russian or Greek or Romanian, so forth, Serbian, who've written important historical works that have been translated into English, because we dumb Anglophones, we naive, innocent, childish Angli, we don't speak other languages, right? And so we need these things. Because we don't want to be stuck only with these Western sources. I've named a lot of Western sources because that's what we have, because we speak English, right? We have not a lot of our Orthodox literature in English is available, but it's mostly specific. It is, strictly speaking, spiritual literature or theological or church history literature. But we need philosophical and historical works that are not strictly ecclesiastical, but are secular, but from the Orthodox civilization, from the Orthodox point of view, that have been rendered now into English. We really need these. I know that Matthew Rayfield Johnson is familiar with many of these sources. Maybe he could recommend to some of our eager beavers to translate and make these things available in English. So that's enough for now. Start with those things, and I think y'all are doing a lot. I can't say I've done all of it myself. Okay, so getting back to the connection between memory and eternity, okay, by living within the true story of our history, we break out of the fake eternity of a delusional present. This is a very big thing to realize. Okay, by living within the true story of our history, our biblical history, our church history, our history as a Christian civilization, by living within the true story, and then our own history, our own life histories connected to that, right, in the framework of that, as part of that, and it is part of that. Okay? We break out of the fake eternity of a delusional present. Now, I'm going to break out this concept of a delusional present. Okay, now, historically and traditionally, the delusional present is the present of a shamanistic, on the primitive level, a shamanistic worldview. On a more cultured level, the Brahmanistic or Platonic cyclical worldview. But to illustrate it more dramatically, let's talk about shamanism. What's a shaman? A shaman is the primitive pagan holy man, right? And in his teepee or hut or his yurt or whatever, he's building fires and he's doing incantations and he's getting in touch with the spirit world. And he really does get in touch with the spirit world. Unfortunately, they're the bad spirits. And his soul, he really can train his soul to leave his body and travel in the demonic universe. And people go to him and to get advice or to be trained how to do the same thing, right, and escape into their spiritual world, which is, unfortunately, apart from faith and baptism, it is a demonic world, right? But when they leave his hut and they leave the spirit world, or they leave their astral traveling, whatever you want to call it, they get back into the present, it is a timeless present, right, because they don't really have a concept of history. And so we have to understand about these primitive cultures. We call them primitive, actually. They're just they're the people that wandered farther away at the time of Babel and developed, kind of degenerated into these very degraded or, what's called primitive cultures. Okay, so they live in a kind of a timeless. They're just, for them, there are just two kinds of time. They don't have history. There are two kinds of time. There is the present, and then there is which is timeless. They just live in the present. And then there's this spirit world or dream world or fairy tale world they enter in through shamanistic methods. So both their present is delusional because they have no history, and the spirit world is delusional because they're entering the world of the demons, right? Then now at a higher, more sophisticated level, there's the cyclical worldview of Brahmanism or Platonism or the great Oriental religions. But again, it's delusional, right? Because they don't know the key to history. They don't have Christ, and they're basically living in the present, or they're living in a timeless metaphysical world of the archetypes. So this is all plani, as we say in Greek, or prelest, as we say in Slavonic. It's all delusion, right? So what God did is He broke into history and He revealed what our first parents once knew in paradise, right? He broke man out of his plani, out of his delusion, and revealed to us that we have a history. Remember, the very concept of history, the idea that man lives in a history, is a specifically Christian idea because God had to reveal this to us. So it reveals to us history reveals to us that we live as pilgrims and strangers on an active journey of this life. This life is not a delusional world that we have to escape, right? It's a real thing that is an active journey and a struggle and a contest and a drama that we're living through in order to attain eternal life, which is even more real. This life is real, and the next life is even more real. Like, this life is real, and the next life is even more real. And we want to successively struggle in this battle of life. We want to successfully complete the journey of this life to arrive at the heavenly kingdom. But the heavenly kingdom also does break in on us throughout our journey, right? God's always giving us these little signs, consolations, warnings, revelations saying, yes, I'm here with you, that the heavenly kingdom is indeed now, but it's also not yet. A Christian lives in the now and not yet. The divine liturgy is the moment where heaven breaks into earth, right? The other offices, Vespers, Matins, right, are praising God within time, and then they are preparation for that moment when, in the divine liturgy, we break out of time into the timeless eternity of God. And note that the divine liturgy itself, the highest, greatest experience of God by man on earth, is centered on anamnesis, on memory. When we recall the moment in the Eucharistic prayer, where we recall all the great deeds of God, and then recall the mystical supper, and recall how Christ said, "This is my body, this is my blood," and we recall the names of the saints. This is the great central triumphal anamnesis of the Christian race, and through this act of anamnesis, the Holy Spirit breaks into this world, transforms the bread and wine of the body and blood of Christ, and lifts it, and then we commune of it, and we're lifted up. We partake by foretaste of the heavenly kingdom, and it is one way of looking at it, and a valid way, an essential way of looking at it is an act of memory. It's an act of memory. So we have to. We're people of history. We're people of memory. So write your autobiography, cultivate your memories, read good history, and above all, of course, there's the Holy Scripture. I didn't mention that because that goes without saying. And also, about memory, memorize Scripture and memorize prayers. One thing that the Bolshevik establishment has done to us in education is to denigrate and destroy the idea of rote learning. Well, that's just rote learning. Well, I got news for you. Without rote learning, there ain't no other kind of learning because you have to know things in order to be able to think about things. So get back to memorizing. Memorize when you're teaching children how to read and so forth, memorizing. You memorize psalms, memorize prayers. Also teach them to memorize good poetry, memorize songs, and build up that whole storehouse within the soul, both of sacred and secular learning. So memorize. And some of you have listened to our series called Thoughts on Spiritual Life, where I went through the chapters in Unseen Warfare by Theophan the Recluse on prayer. And Theophan the Recluse really emphasizes memorizing prayers. Memorize, memorize, memorize. It's never too late to start. Unfortunately, for us old folks, it's a lot harder. But when you're teaching children or you're a young person starting out in your educational and spiritual journey, memorize. Memorize your morning and evening prayers, memorize psalms, memorize verses of Scripture, memorize good poetry, memorize songs. You've got to do it. You've got to store it up inside of yourself. The day may come when they will take away your computers. They will take away your books. The day may come you're sitting in a solitary confinement cell or you're in a prison, and all you have is what you've got stored up inside of you. And so you store up all you can. Store it up now. It's still summer, but winter may be coming, so stir it all up. Not stir it all up. Well, we've got to stir up some stuff too. We're going to stir up some stuff. But store up some stuff. And be cheerful. There's a funny saying, it's a wise saying, living well is the best revenge. Okay, living well is the best revenge. Be cheerful. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. But besides memory, I also want to emphasize also living well. And not by living well, I don't mean living high on the hog and eating the best food and driving an expensive car and all that. By living well, I mean living a truly human life, both in your spiritual life and in your day-to-day life, your secular life. Remember that God loves us and He wants us to be happy. So force yourself to be cheerful. Say your prayers. Tell stories, sing songs, smile for the children, be cheerful. Don't tell the children, we're doomed and bad things are happening and I'm so worried about you. Children don't need to hear that. They need a cheerfulness and smiling and to be happy. We belong to the Lord, and besides our negative response to bad things, we have to have a negative response to bad things. We have to have a positive response to good things. So create in your home a place of happiness, a place of memory, a place of celebration, a place of happiness. It's very important. So I'm going to end today. I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to sing. Why not? Something we haven't tried yet. I'm going to close with 3 songs. Well, no, 2 songs and a hymn. Now, these first 2 songs are they're very short, and they're 2 early American religious songs. I'm not going to do Orthodox chant, or not Eastern Orthodox chants for you, because y'all get plenty of that. I trust you listen to your chant at church, and you're listening to chant YouTubes and so forth. But I'm going to do something different here. This is part of my memory, right? My racial or cultural memory, and both from my Anglo-Saxon Protestant side and my French Catholic side. So start off with the Anglo-Saxon side. 2 early American religious songs. This is on an old album called Rose of Sharon. The vocal group is called Western Wind. It's an album of early American religious music. Of course, these people were Protestants, but they had a very sober view of life. This isn't goofy 20th century or 21st century praise band music, right? This is music by songs by serious people. And really, the first one is simply about the shortness of life. And I like this in light of all this COVID hysteria. People are so afraid to die. They're just afraid to die, I mean, the flu has a 99.7% survival rate, and they're still walking around with masks and acting like it's the Black Death. You would think that the carts were going down the street and they were calling, "Bring out the dead." You'd think that people were seeing people around dropping like flies, and they're not. I mean, most people don't even know somebody who died from COVID, or maybe they know one or two. So everybody's afraid of death, right? They're trying to extend their miserable biological existence because they don't know what their life's all about. They don't have a true grasp of eternity and the shortness of man's life. Well, our ancestors had an appreciation of shortness of man's life because you could die any moment. You could die any week by getting a strep throat or getting kicked in the face by a mule. And life used to be about quality. The quantity may have been, the length of the life may have been very short, but what mattered was quality, right? But now it's all about quantity. Just extend it. Got to have one more day to watch TV, one more day to eat pizza, right? How meaningful. And so they're just desperate to keep their lives going no matter what. Their biological, I shouldn't say life, I should say their miserable biological existence, their corruptible, passion-ridden, worry-ridden, miserable, bottom-feeding existence. So they're walking around with their masks and they're shaming people not wearing their masks and all this nonsense. But these people that wrote this song, they unfortunately they were Protestant heretics and they didn't have the whole story, but they had a big part of the story. Let me sing this for you. Life. Oh wait, it's not life, it's death. Whatever. I do this all the time. My son tried to correct me. It's death, like an overflowing stream. There we go. Death. All right, let me start again. Death, like an overflowing stream, sweeps us away, our lives but a dream, an empty tale, a morning's flower, cut down and withered in an hour. That was short. I'll do it again. Death, like an overflowing stream, sweeps us away, our lives but a dream, an empty tale, a morning's flower, cut down and withered in an hour. An empty tale, a morning's flower, cut down and withered in an hour. Sing that a few times. That'll sober you up. This next one is very beautiful. It's not about death directly, but it's about what happens after death, which is being with God. And it's a beautiful expression of longing for union with God in eternity. Father, I long, I faint to see the place of thine abode. I'd leave thine earthly courts and flee up to thy seat, my God. Here I behold thy distant face, and 'tis a pleasing sight, but to abide in thine embrace is infinite delight. This is a good song for humming. Father, I faint to see the place of thine abode. I'd leave thine earthly courts and flee up to thy seat, my God. Here I behold thy distant face, and 'tis a pleasing sight. But to abide in thine embrace is infinite delight. The last thing I'd like to sing for you is a hymn from the Latin office for St. John the Baptist. It's the office hymn for Matins for St. John the Baptist. Tomorrow is St. John's birthday, June 24th on the old calendar. And I'd like to dedicate this to the memory of my ancestor, Jean-Baptiste Lacombe, who as far as I could tell from my researches, is the first of our French ancestors to come from France came in the 1790s to central Louisiana. Jean-Baptiste, the feast of St. John the Baptist, is very important to the French people. It's still, even in today's secular Marxist Quebec, it's still, I believe, a state holiday because of the French history. This hymn is called Ut Queant Laxis. Ut Queant Laxis. And it's a famous hymn because it is the first vowel of the vowel of the first syllable of each of these lines became the basis of the do re mi system. Except first it was ut re mi that became later on do re mi. So look up Ut Queant Laxis and Guido of Arezzo, and you'll learn something about the history of Western music. So the music here is from the Liber Usualis. The Liber Usualis is a basic collection of Gregorian chant hymns. It's not the only collection. It's the collection used historically in parishes, whereas in the monasteries they used the Psalter and the Antiphonale and Kyriale. But the Liber Usualis is online, and I've got the link in my notes on my blog. And this is a Liber that actually has English translations in it, so it's just an amazing resource. So as part of our heritage, whether you're Western Christian background who have become Orthodox or becoming Orthodox, or you're an Eastern Orthodox who just loves the whole history of the Church Catholic with a small c, and appreciates the ancient Western chant, go get your Liber. It's online. And also you can buy one. You can still buy one, support the publishers, and buy one. I have one at home, sitting next to my Oxford English Dictionary in my living room. And I put out now and then to sing from it. So this is a beautiful hymn of St. John the Baptist. I dedicate this to the memory of my ancestor, Jean-Baptiste Lacombe, but also as a prayer for our beloved sisters of Novi Stinic Monastery in Serbia, who is celebrating their Slava tomorrow, their feast day tomorrow. So let me pull up my page of the Liber, and we'll sing Ut Queant Laxis. You can look at the text in the notes. Ut queat laxis resonare fibris, mira gestorum, famuli tuorum, salve polluti, labi reatum, Sancte Ioannes, Nuncius Celso, veniens Olimpo, te patrimonium fore nascitorum, nomen et vitae, seriem gerende, ordine promit. Ile promisi dubius superni, pedidit prompte modulos loquele, sed reformasti genitus perempte organa vocis. Ventris obstruso recubans culibili,
Senseras regem, thalamo manentem, in parens nati, meritis uterque, abdica pandit. Sed ecus patri geniteque proli, et ibi compar, utriusque virtus, Spiritus semper, Deus unus omni, temporis evo. Amen.
Holy Baptist and Forerunner John, pray to God for us.